Hello and welcome to Call of the Outdoors, the podcast of the Pennsylvania Game Commission. We've got a really cool episode today. We got Mr. Chad Iser. Chad's from the Bureau of Wildlife Protection, and he's in charge of all the special permits throughout the state and been around a long time, and also the agency historian, if you will. And also from Wildlife Management, we have Tom Keller, who is our fur bearer biologist. And, we're going to talk about a whole lot of different things, but the most important thing we're going to get through today is a lot of the myths about the agency and things that have happened from the start of time. And I'm pretty excited to talk about a lot of this stuff. But before we get started, I want you to remember that the application period for our 24-25 elk hunting season is now open. If you visit our website at huntfishpa.gov or any hunting license issuing agent, you can apply for 1 to 3 seasons, and they're $11.97 per season. For Pennsylvania hunters and conservationists, our roots run deep. The episodes we bring to you on the Pennsylvania Game Commission's podcast, Call of the Outdoors, will take a deep dive into exposing the incredible work being done by agency staff and partners, including statewide habitat projects, the science behind wildlife management, and what drives agency decisions. The Pennsylvania Game Commission's mission is twofold: to manage and protect wildlife and their habitats for not only current but future generations, and to promote hunting and trapping in the Keystone State. Man, we're in for a fun one today, and two great folks here today. And, Chad Iser, tell us a little bit about, your story here at the Game Commission. You've been here a long time. I mean, probably BC, right?
No, not that far. I came into the Game Commission in 2001. I was a member of the 26th class of the Ross Leffler School of Conservation.
Is that the best class?
Well, yes.
Okay.
It is. And I graduated in 2002. And then I was sent to York County. I spent about a decade there. 2011, 2012, came up to Harrisburg, where I became the chief of the Special Permits Enforcement Division. So I oversee all the permits for the Pennsylvania Game Commission.
Right. And like I say all the time, behind the walls of the Game Commission, there's so much that goes on, and
Sure.
and your job is one of them. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today on some of this stuff. And Tom, you're a familiar face to so many folks, right now with the project you have going on, and your history is pretty broad too here at the game agency.
It is. So, yeah, I actually started as a bioaid back in 2006 with the waterfowl section, and then left to work for the federal government for a federal wildlife agency for about 5 years, came back to the agency as a biologist in the Southwest region, and then slowly started to work my way up as the pheasant and quail coordinator, pheasant and quail and mourning dove biologist for a number of years. Actually took a step up to a supervisory position, which I realized I did not particularly enjoy.
And most people don't do that.
Right,
I mean, yeah.
Right. So I actually took a demotion to step down into the fur bearer biologist position, where I feel like I can do my best for the agency. So I really enjoy this position and have 16 different species to help manage, which is really a great thing for me. And as far as the rest of my career, I think I can do a lot of good things for those species.
Well, and that's incredible. And that's when you look at the PGC as a whole and folks that are every day grinding for the better of wildlife and the better habitat. Everybody has their piece of their pie there, and it's pretty amazing. I thank both of you gentlemen for your service. But, you're also, the fur bear biologist, but you're also a trapper. Mm-hmm. And, we had a mutual friend that recently passed away this year. And, when I went over one day, when I took this job, Jerry Johnson Furs, I mentioned your name and said, man, he used to come here and skin fox and coons, and he worked in here skinning animals as a young boy. So a lot of people don't realize that this passion runs deep. And
Sure.
I've heard many stories, Chad, about you especially when you're a game warden, and just the way that you ran your district was pretty incredible with your deputies, and took a lot of pride in every day of your service here at the agency.
Yeah, sure. I think all of us do that. I think the Game Commission, we have about 900 employees, and I think that people will find that 900 of those employees take pride in what they do, are proud to work for the agency, are outdoors people in some means, manner, or form. And you're right, we all have a specialty. I go to Tom quite a bit because he's the fur bearer expert. I am not. I'm the permit expert. So I'm smart enough to reach out, and that collaborative effect that we have with each other, that happens every day, multiple times a day with all of our staff. That's what makes the agency run so well. No question.
It really doesn't. And one thing I'll say about Chad is he makes every day brighter in Harrisburg. Like there's always a smile, and there's always going to make someone laugh. And most of the time, what he speaks is the truth, except when he's lying.
Well, that's rare. That's a rare thing.
Yeah. Well, in all honesty, today's pretty cool because we're going to talk about, obviously since social media has come out, like all the myths and just straight up bullcrap that we hear out there. And I'm not going to lie, before I worked at the agency, I'd hear stuff and I'd be like, man, that sounds good. That's probably true. And it sounded good. And we're going to talk about a lot of that and from your experience and just try to bust some of these myths and so folks can understand. And, obviously as a state agency, everything we have, folks can look at. Like, we're not hiding anything. We're transparent about everything. And that's what we're going to do today. And, I'm going to come to you right now. First one.
Sure.
We see this all the time. I saw coyotes that the PGC stocked. And, talk about coyotes and how they got here and why they're here. And did we ever stock them?
Yeah, and that's something, honestly, that I've been hearing since I was a young boy 30 years ago. When I started hunting in Pennsylvania, this was a myth that, like, I heard from older generations, and we've been hearing it for 4 generations. But what we know about coyotes, first of all, is we certainly did not stock them because we have all the evidence we need to know how they got into Pennsylvania. And so there's a lot of good genetic research that has actually been able to track coyotes coming across from Western North America. And what's interesting is we saw a split. We saw Western coyotes start to move across the Midwest, and then we saw a divergence. So we saw some of those Western coyotes go up into Canada through the upper Midwest. And then what we saw, which this is what we hear as well, and it's actually true, is that those coyotes started to hybridize with wolves. And so we see this genetic mix as they come across Canada and drop in to the Northeast, particularly into New York and Pennsylvania. But we also saw these Western coyotes, more of the true subpopulation, work across from the West, across Ohio. And so Pennsylvania is really considered what we call a contact or mixing zone of these 2 subpopulations coming together. And what's interesting is we refer to our coyotes as the eastern coyote now, and it's because of that hybridization. And because of that, we actually see a larger coyote, and we see color variation. So, a lot of times we get maybe sightings of folks that think they see a wolf, but what they're seeing is some of those wolf genetics coming out in coloration in coyotes. So we have black coyotes, we have all white coyotes, and then, of course, anything in between there. It's not just your typical tan coyote that we're used to seeing in the West. So we really saw those start to come in the 1940s in Pennsylvania. Again, it's very clearly documented when they started to come in. And, of course, coyotes are now occupying every space in Pennsylvania. And we have a relatively stable population at this point in time.
So there wasn't tractor-trailer loads with ear tags and all-state insurance tags. I mean, we hear that all the time.
We do. But no, fortunately, what science has showed us is we can very clearly track them coming across.
So when you look at the current population of I'm sorry, I said coyotes, and it's probably coyotes.
Yeah, you can refer to them, in several different ways.
But you look at the current population and talk about the importance of trapping and hunting, and if you would, I mean, it goes with every species out there that we're managing, but
it does.
Talk a little bit about that in the coyote population.
Yeah, so when we look at coyote populations, they're, like I said, they're relatively stable, but what's important to note is that trapping and hunting is critical for really all fur bear management, and it's not necessarily this idea that we're controlling fur bear populations. In reality, a lot of those are somewhat self-controlling. As we see fur market prices go up and down, we see harvest increase and decrease, but populations are held relatively steady, primarily through disease and some other issues that occur. But what we see with coyotes and other fur bears is we can gather a crazy amount of information through harvest, which we don't get that with our non-game species. So they can be a little bit more difficult to manage long-term, but we get lots of things through harvest, like age structure. We can look at health, we can look at disease issues, and try to help monitor that, which can be really important for humans as well. We think about things like rabies and distemper and things that can impact humans or pets directly, we're able to get a lot of that information through our harvest. And so that's why harvest is so important for many of these species.
And you look at predators for one, and I might be way off base when I say this, but we're predators as humans, and we learn how to adapt. And predators are very, very well, all wildlife, but predators are really good about adapting to life. You look at, where your area, where you came from in York. I mean, there's coyotes downtown York. I mean,
we have them in all 67 counties in the state, as Tom referenced. And I think there's a positive historical reference to this as well. I think people would be proud to know, turn of the 20th century, most of our species were extirpated, wildlife species were extirpated from the Commonwealth. And the Game Commission did restock a lot of species. Coyotes weren't one of them. We stocked game species. And in fact, when we established refuges through this state, which started in 1905 and ran up until like 1945, the end of World War II, those refuge keepers were essentially officers. Their job was many, but part of their job was to basically kill all predators that were predating against game species. So we weren't stalking coyotes, we were stalking deer, we were stalking rabbits, we were stalking everything we could to bring back those extirpated species, elk, things like that. And I think people would be proud to know that the Game Commission, from its earliest days, was doing that. I mean, those species were gone at the turn of the 20th century, and people just saw that happen, from after the Civil War up until 1900, and we were established in 1895. And all of our early efforts, it wasn't enforcement, it wasn't the biology of the species, it was to bring back those extirpated species. So there's a lot of pride with what we did with restocking. It's just coyotes weren't one of those species, as Tom mentioned.
So that's a word that's used a lot, and I'm gonna take this here, extirpated. So there's a lot of folks out there that don't know what that means. So if you would just take that, because obviously you're looking at the marten right now that was an extirpated species, and just let's talk about that, the meaning of that word. We can figure it out, but exactly what that means to folks out there.
And that's a good point, Matt, because we hear sometimes extirpation and extinction used both kind of in the same time. And there's different ways that you can use that. Extirpation generally means that a wildlife species has disappeared from a particular area. So when we say something's extirpated from Pennsylvania, it just means martens were lost from Pennsylvania. It doesn't mean that like the American marten was extinct and the whole entire population disappeared. We still have really healthy populations of things like marten and other species in other parts of their traditional or historic range. So we can have local extirpation. So we saw that with things like wild pheasants, where we had wild pheasants, even though they're not a native, and we saw those extirpated. We saw that with other species as well. So extirpated just means that there was a population there, and then they disappeared through a variety of different reasons. And there's a lot of things that can drive extirpation. As Chad mentioned, a lot of what we saw in Pennsylvania was primarily the loss of our forest. So we lost really almost 100% of our forest, and a lot of species relied on that. But we also saw like predator persecution. So a lot of species were heavily persecuted. We saw a bounty system come in. And then we also saw unregulated harvest. So as Chad mentioned, we were formed in 1895, and immediately we started bringing species back and really trying to stop market hunting. That was one of our primary goals and why we were formed. And all these things kind of led to extirpation, that unregulated harvest and loss of habitat. So
when you get to our age, first of all, I thought extirpation was like when you had trouble going to the bathroom when I first heard it. But when you get to our age, when you think about 1895, that wasn't that long ago.
Right.
When you really think about where we're at in wildlife. But another thing we hear a lot too is that we trap turkeys and transfer them to other areas and transfer them out of the state and trade them for coyotes. And we hear this a lot. We do have a turkey trapping program, and there's a biological reason for that. At this point in time, we're not transferring turkeys anymore, correct?
That is correct. Yeah, the last time that we actually trapped and actually moved turkeys was around 2008, 2009. And that was an experiment that we did in Pittsburgh. We had some urban turkeys. We were trying to move them out of the city into areas where we wanted to kind of reestablish. And it wasn't very successful. And again, it was an experiment. It was very expensive. So that was actually the last time we trapped and moved turkeys. But you're right. I mean, we have trapping crews. Right now we're in the midst of a really long-term trapping study for hens and gobblers. And so we're still trapping a lot of turkeys and marking a lot of turkeys.
And we also tag gobblers for, so we can see success ratios and things like that. And in my life, coming from the turkey world, Target 2000 was a NWTF, mission to get turkey populations in all 50 states. And Alaska obviously isn't one of them, but 49 of the 50 states, provinces in Canada, Mexico, there's huntable populations of wild turkeys everywhere. And there was a lot of turkeys that were moved around, but we're lucky here in Pennsylvania. We've always had a good population. I mean, since those days.
Yep. And that trap and relocate program, we did a lot of that when I was in the field. And it was one of those things where, around noon, you'd get a call saying you're going to have 50 turkeys coming to your district, be prepared. And in York, especially, which is about, which was where my district was and where I can speak intelligently about it, I think that helped the turkey population a lot in York County, those early programs. So, we never traded them for any other type of species. We were just moving them, as Tom said, within the Commonwealth to give hunters opportunities, especially back then in the spring season. Yeah, but it was very successful where I was.
And if you look at the turkey population today, from my memories in the late 70s, early 80s, there's turkeys in places today that we've never had turkeys.
Yeah, absolutely. York's perfect example of that. Absolutely.
We sit at Elmerton Avenue and can watch a strutting gobbler right now, and that would have never happened 30 years ago. Never.
You're exactly right. Yep, that was the efforts. And like you said, the NWTF was big in that. Tom mentioned it's very expensive. And even the boxes to move them, you couldn't reuse. So NWTF was picking up the tab for a lot of that and making sure, again, that it's sportsmen taking care of wildlife. And you're exactly right. People have viewing opportunities, hunting opportunities they never would have had in the past.
Just to go out and listen to one gobble this time of year right now, and it is pretty incredible. I mean, to watch a 22-pound bird fly up in a tree is pretty awesome. So here's another thing we hear a lot, and I'm sure both of you have heard this your whole career, is about car insurance companies. They're controlling our harvest in deer, or they're giving us money as the agency. Again, our books are open. I mean, everybody can see it. And I mean, you've been here a pretty long time. You ever seen a check from a car insurance company?
No, that's because it never happened.
Right.
And our method of management by law is hunting and fur taking. Like, we have to do that via statute.
Say that again.
Our method of management in Pennsylvania under Title 34, Section 103B is we shall use hunting and fur taking as a method of management to manage wildlife populations. So we're not accepting income from any entity, for any other reason. So we provide hunting opportunities, fur taking opportunities to the public. That's the way we have to do it via law. That's the way the public expects us to do it. And there's really no other way that we lawfully can do it. There are some permitted activities, but that they're rare in occurrence. But no, there's never been any type of payment to the Pennsylvania Game Commission for any reason. We make those decisions about what we harvest based upon sound biological decisions from knowledgeable biologists, and then the whole staff comes together, the enforcement efforts that go behind that. That's the way we manage wildlife in PA. No other way.
Knowledgeable and good looking like Tom.
It's a fair point.
So that brings another question. When Chad said that, it kind of dropped the mic, in my opinion, on that. I mean, it is something that we hear a lot, and quite honestly, from the outside looking in, it sounds good. Because we have a lot of deer in this state, and you drive up and down the interstate or the turnpike, and you see a lot of animals that are road killed. And before we go anywhere, let's talk about that, because this is coming to you. There is a method that, as a resident of Pennsylvania, constituent, that if you do see a roadkill and you want to take that deer and use it to feed your household, how do you go about doing that?
Well, it's for white-tailed deer and turkey, and you just call our 24-hour dispatch center, and they will give you a permit number over the phone. You may get a visit from an officer just to give you a written permit or to check on the kill, but that's the way we do it. You have to be a resident of the Commonwealth, has to be killed by a motor vehicle, because we don't want those to go to waste.
Right.
That's not our goal. So if a resident can utilize that to feed themselves, feed their families, what have you, then we do issue a free permit for that.
Yeah, and I encourage folks to take advantage of that. Sure. And that number to our dispatch is 1-833-PGC-HUNT, H-U-N-T, or 833-PGC-WILD. Yep. And you can get a hold of our dispatch, which is now 24/7.
24/7.
And they'll get you taken care of.
That's right.
I mean, it happens out there, and we'd love for you to, cut the back straps out and use that resource. I mean, there's nothing better than venison, in my opinion.
Yeah, so. That's right. Put it to use.
So Chad talked about getting to the biologist to set quotas. Could you just give us like a Cliff Notes version on how the quotas are set? Or
Sure.
We're obviously right in at that time where seasons and bags are getting voted on, our digest is getting printed for our upcoming year. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of numbers being crunched, and just if you would just take us through that.
Yeah, for sure. And so the first thing that folks probably should realize is that the way we manage deer in Pennsylvania, and you can check out our deer management plan, but we manage that through a system that was set up by the public and supported by the public. And so there's three primary goals that we're trying to manage deer for. One is for a healthy deer herd. And so we actually look at our harvest each year, our harvest ratios, sex ratios, age ratios, and we're able to pull out and understand, do we have a healthy deer herd? The second is a healthy forest, and so healthy habitat for deer and for other species. And so there we're actually looking at data either from U.S. Forest Service or from our own staff that are doing forest health surveys. And then it's really this idea of human-wildlife conflict and deer-wildlife or deer and human conflict, and what are people willing to tolerate. And so that is primarily gathered from surveys that we do to the public to understand within each wildlife management unit, are people happy with where deer numbers are? Do they want to see more? Do they want to see less? And so we take those three kind of data points, which obviously is a lot of data, and then we pull that together to set our antlerless allocations each year. And then what folks should understand as well is we know in order to harvest one doe, it takes 4 doe tags. So even though folks see these numbers and may be upset that they might be high or think they're high, that's some of the math that kind of goes into why those numbers are the way they are. But really, if you look at our units, most of our units have been relatively stable. The only thing that has changed or may change in the future is really how we deal with CWD.
Right.
And so we have a disease threat like that, which it truly is a major threat to not only deer, but also deer hunting in Pennsylvania. We do need to take additional measures to try to slow or, if we can, stop that spread. And so that's kind of one of the 4 things that we are considering is disease.
Right. And when you look at habitat and you talk about the turn of the century, when wildlife was gone, mm-hmm. there was nothing there for them to live. And when the deer herd does get into check, mm-hmm. things can grow out there. Mm-hmm. I mean, we can't regenerate oak.
That's right.
Without making sure the deer population's in check, and it's hard. It's a tough balance. I mean, but a lot of folks just think you roll the dice and go, right. We're going to go for 50,000 antlerless tags here. There's definitely 365 days a year. Somebody in your bureau is just watching those numbers.
Sure, exactly. Yep.
And it's not. Sometimes I'll expand upon what Tom said there. I was just instructing our cadet class yesterday. It's a 36 classes in there in week 2, I think, right now. But we were talking a little bit about, we have accountability to public, mm-hmm. as you keep mentioning, mm-hmm. Which again is mentioned in statute. I was in teaching law, and I gave them a great example of how Tom makes it sound kind of clean, but I informed a cadet yesterday. I got a call from West Manchester Township on the same road, 2 different calls one day when I was in the field. One person saying that we had too many deer and they were eating their shrubs. Mm-hmm. And the next person who literally lived about 5 houses down from them saying they haven't seen a deer in a year. And so Tom, when he's mentioning, what will the public tolerate, but there are varying issues with that as well that the biologists have to take into account, our commissioners have to take into account. And, when we come up with those numbers, it's everybody's opinion is different on that. And so, we're doing and the biologists and the agency are doing what we can do for the benefit of the wildlife.
And that's the Game Commission's job.
That's right. And habitat.
Yeah.
And promoting our hunting and trapping heritage. That's our mission statement.
It is. The problem we have sometimes, and this is, I'm not saying this to be mean or anything like that. Like we're not our job isn't to go out there and put a deer by you in the tree stand.
Nope.
I mean, that's not our job. And sometimes when we look at hunting in today's technology, where you got maps on your phone, you got the best calls available, you got all the technology that's out there. There's still a part of hunting that's luck, and there's still a lot of skill out there and time in the woods, and a little bit of luck some day is going to make the difference and could be the best day in the world or in the year if a big buck walks by you or a turkey
in general.
Exactly.
A lot of it has to do with luck.
Exactly. So I'm going to go to probably one of the biggest things that's happening now, and I've been hearing about this since I was a kid, and it's a touchy subject when you bring this word up, and I know that you're into it. It's mountain lions. Do we have mountain lions here? And I mean, we've had some sightings in the past year that you went out and kind of disbarred, if that's a word, that myth. Sure. And then we're going to go to Chad on the mountain lion side of things and things that could happen out there with the mountain lion. But let's talk, do we have mountain lions in Pennsylvania?
So this answer will probably surprise you and most of the listeners, but the answer, if we're being honest, is yes. And when we say we have mountain lions in Pennsylvania, part of it is what Chad deals with. So we actually provide permits to menageries and other folks to have mountain lions, but they're domestic mountain lions. So these are lions in cages, in enclosures. When we really think about that question, a lot of folks are asking, do we have a breeding population of wild mountain lions in Pennsylvania? And so the answer is no, we don't have a breeding population. But then there's another question is, could we have a wild mountain lion in Pennsylvania? The answer to that is yes, we possibly could. And before 2011, I would say probably not. And any biologist would have said that would be almost impossible. But what we saw in 2011 was a mountain lion from South Dakota, the western side of South Dakota, made an 1,800-mile journey across the U.S. to the east, almost on a string, went up into Canada, down into New York, almost to the Atlantic Ocean in Connecticut before it finally got hit by a car. And there were several sightings along the way, and then they were able to actually track back different genetic samples. And when they sampled this mountain lion, when they found it along the road, they opened it up. They found there was a lot of actually like wildlife species in its stomach, which is a good sign. It still had its claws. Its teeth were in good shape. Overall, the animal was very healthy. And what they saw and on the pelt was actually you could still see the spots because it was a juvenile male that had dispersed from that population. Now, that population was really the furthest to the east along the northern part of their range. And that animal, a young dispersing male, is looking for females. And he just decided he was going to head in one direction until he hit the ocean, until he could find a female. And, of course, he did not find a female.
He was on Rumspringer.
Yeah, that's right. So what we were able to do then was genetically tie that back to that population. And so when we say, could it be possible to see a wild mountain lion in Pennsylvania? The answer, to be honest, is yes. The chances, again, extremely slim. And
probably have better chances of hitting Powerball.
I would think so.
I mean, in that realm.
I would think so, yeah. But what we need to understand, and really where this myth comes alive, is we get hundreds of sightings every year. I get several a week, and when things hit the news, I might get like 40, 50 a week. All of a sudden, people start thinking they're seeing them. But I haven't been able to substantiate a single one of those, and especially if we get videos, photo. And what folks need to remember is we do need evidence, and they leave evidence. It's not a ghost. all species leave some type of evidence. And this is the perfect example. When that cat moved from South Dakota in 1,800 miles, it left a trail of evidence, whether it was pictures, video, scat samples, hair samples, and we could track that back. And so when we think about Pennsylvania, and we think about probably tens of thousands of trail cameras in the woods.
And cell cameras.
Maybe more of that.
Like with technology today.
Absolutely. Surely we would get them. If we had a wild breeding population, surely we would get that. And surely some of these reports would be substantiated. But and what we see in these reports when I do get photos and videos, 99% are actually house cats.
Right.
And that kind of makes sense because that a house cat is just a miniature version. If it's the right color and they have a very thin coat, so they look very muscular, it's all about scale. It's, is there something in the picture that tells us how big that animal really is?
Because obviously you've been in cat country in the West.
Yeah,
and
sure.
They do leave sign.
Absolutely.
And when you're in cat country, you see tracks.
Yes.
I mean, you see everything that they leave behind. And like you said, we need evidence. But let's go to your side about, I mean, there are folks that do have big cats in this state.
Yep, there are. Pennsylvania, it's about the early 80s. The General Assembly passed some laws regarding what's considered exotic wildlife. So exotic wildlife, we'll get calls in my division that about exotic wildlife. That term in Pennsylvania basically means three things. It means bears. That's the exotic wildlife is bears. Any member of the family Felidae, except those commonly referred to as house cats, and any member of the family Canidae, except those licensed by Department of Agriculture. So basically bears, dogs, cats. That's exotic wildlife in Pennsylvania. So the Pennsylvania Game Commission does offer permits. We offer exotic wildlife, using that term, possession permits, where a person can possess exotic wildlife, one of those three species. Dealer permits, where if a person is dealing in those, in other words, they're selling them to lawful buyers, we issue those permits. And then menagerie permits, as Tom said, which basically are zoos, but they're not zoos. They're actually permitted by the Pennsylvania Game Commission. It's basically a place where there's public exhibition of these animals. So it is very difficult to get one of those permits. Other states look at us with great envy, Ohio being one of them at one point, because there was just free buying and trading of those animals in Ohio with very little regulatory oversight.
Yeah, I happened to be going down I-70 when all those got loose, and
right.
It was pretty scary.
Yes.
I mean,
there was a gentleman that evidently let all of his animals go, and
can you imagine a tiger driving to work and all of a sudden you see a Bengal tiger?
That's right.
That's why we have what we have.
We do, and so they're very, very, very stringent laws. You have to have years of experience with the animal and the care, feeding, handling, husbandry from a recognized facility that we recognize. You have to have concurrence from your local governmental body before you're issued one of those permits. So townships, just aren't waking up one day and there's a tiger. So they get to have a say in this. We felt it was important for them to have a say in it, even though state law tends to override local ordinance. There's all kinds of inspections you have to go through, cage requirements. We are very, very strict on this. So when we say we have people out there like this, you're literally talking 8 exotic wildlife possession holders, 8 exotic wildlife dealers, and about 95, 96 menageries. That's it through the state. So we don't have that many. And not all of those have exotic wildlife. Certainly the exotic wildlife possession holders and dealer permit holders do. But menageries, they might be displaying hawks, owls, chipmunks, hedgehogs, just things that aren't considered exotic wildlife. Menagerie covers all species of wildlife on Earth. So very, very highly regulated. If there's an escape, which I know of none since I've been with the agency, they're so regulated that we're very, very cautious, and we take that public safety and the safety and the welfare of the animal very seriously in this state.
And that's exactly what we wanted to get to. We're serious about this.
Sure.
This is not something we live this every day. I watch, you and your staff. I mean, there's something going on over there all the time.
Sure.
With permits, and I mean, it's not just wildlife. It's all the permits that we do offer throughout the agency.
Yeah, we offer. I think this agency, with all of the permits that we issue, we're probably in the 200,000 range.
Wow.
Yeah, but that includes disabled permits, shooting range permits, pheasant permits, etc. So, we issue a lot of permits.
That's job security.
Yeah, I suppose.
So just to recap on the mountain lion thing, because it is a big thing. I mean, between that and how many Bigfoot calls do you get?
Yeah, we get those as well. Yes, so we get those as well. And
Have you found any Bigfoot evidence?
We have not. We
Okay.
haven't had any good evidence yet to support that either.
Okay.
Yeah.
I remember when I was a kid, and you probably remember this. Remember those in the snow? They made Bigfoot tracks you
sure.
can put on, and you can go out and make tracks.
Of course.
Yeah.
Might need to find a pair of those and go make some evidence for Tom to find. Yeah.
Tom will be on your trail.
Yeah.
So we're hearing a lot now about feral hogs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember, it was one area in particular. Now we're hearing them throughout the state. I mean, do we have a feral hog population out there?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And so part of that, we need to kind of define like feral hogs. And really, in Pennsylvania, that really just means any hog that's outside of an enclosure kind of living wild. So that can be the neighbor's domestic pig, pink pig that we see kind of meandering out through the woods. Or it could be, your Asian wild boar. It could be some of traditionally what we think of feral hogs in the South. But a lot of what we've seen kind of in the news or lately is, there was some talk that, they're expanding throughout the state. We have these populations exploding. And that's just not true. So what we do is we work very closely with a great partner, USDA Wildlife Services in Pennsylvania. And they have specialists that really deal with feral hogs throughout the country. And so working with them and our wardens specifically is as we get sightings or reports, those all get investigated as quickly as possible because we don't want them on the landscape. And so what we've seen is actually over the last 10, 20 years, a strikingly decreasing population of our feral hogs. And again, whether that's a single pig or whether that is a breeding population, we've been able to respond to those very quickly and knock them out. And I know there's some hunters out there that really would look forward to that harvest opportunity. But what folks need to understand is just how destructive
I was just going to say that
this animal is. Yeah.
One of my favorite places to hunt in the world is Oklahoma. And I have a friend that has a really nice place to go, and when hogs are there, it destroys everything, and they populate fast.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I think I'm not 100% sure, but they can have litters like every 3 or 4 months once they. I mean, it's rapid,
very fast. Yeah,
yeah,
for sure. And it's a kind of a dual or double-edged sword. It's this destruction of habitat, which is really bad for all of our other wildlife species and really hard to recover from. But it's also a major threat to our pork industry in Pennsylvania. And that's something that USDA is very concerned about because of the diseases that they carry that could easily be transferred into our domestic pork production. So that's why we respond so quickly and try to knock them out. That's why we've been doing a good job. And again, to throw a shout out to our wildlife services partners, they've been doing an excellent job at really knocking these down. And our wardens, they're really that first line of defense. So we've been seeing actually a decreasing population, and we still get reports here and there, but again, we respond very quickly to that.
And everybody loves bacon, so we need to make sure that we get that population down when it does happen out there. And I mean, so let's head on over to fishers.
Sure.
Because this is one, especially this time of year, we're coming into spring, turkey season's coming, and, lots of anecdotal stuff out there about fishers, and they're killing all the turkeys. So I'm sure this one's right down your alley.
Sure, yeah. And what's interesting with fishers, besides the coyote, it's been really the most demonized predator species we have in Pennsylvania, and primarily because of this thought that they are impacting turkey populations. So like we've done kind of with the marten assessment, is we start to look at really what evidence do we have that they're taking turkeys. We do hear these stories, particularly stories that they're climbing up at night and taking turkeys off the roost. And we hear
it makes sense to some people.
Sure,
it
does. It makes sense. They're very agile climbers. They spend a lot of time in the trees, but a lot of that's anecdotal. A lot of those stories, when I hear those, it's always third or fourth or fifth person. And we also need to consider when we're walking in the woods without headlamps on, trying to get close to that gobbler, we can't get too close, even in the middle of the night, because that bird's going to jump. Or if you've ever, jumped a flock of turkeys off the roost just by walking by them in the dark. I mean, those birds aren't knocked out cold, and they're not going to sit there and let a fisher climb up and kill them. But again, when we look at the science, we look at diet, and fortunately we have done a pretty in-depth diet research project in Pennsylvania on fishers. And what's interesting is we do see they're true omnivore. They eat a lot of different things, but one thing that didn't come up in their diet was turkeys. Now, I won't sit here and tell you that a fisher has never eaten a turkey. I have no doubt they have. But when we look at those diet research, it's very clear that turkeys they're not in the research, which just tells us that it's not a major prey item for the fisher. And when we look at really what are fishers eating, again, it's primarily things like rodents. They eat a lot of carrion, so a lot of dead animals along the road. We see a lot of deer, raccoons, coyotes, like opossums, skunks, a lot of things that get hit along the road. They do eat porcupines, probably not as many as people think or maybe hope that they do. And then just a huge variety of other things, reptiles, amphibians, fish, things like that. So it's really looking at that science to better understand what are they actually eating and are they making an impact on turkey populations. And based on that, they are not.
If you think about turkeys in general, what would be one of the biggest threats in your opinion, or are you going to wait for the study to be done?
Well, yeah, certainly we have this great 4-year study that's looking at survival, looking at predation, mortality. If we're asking that question, what is the biggest threats? And I've talked to Mary Jo about this, and obviously having her on would be great because she could speak much more in depth.
She's on next month when we get into the turkey season stuff.
Yeah. I mean, she's the true expert. But I was a game bird biologist for a number of years, and so we know with especially ground nesting game birds, it's primarily this loss of habitat. Is the habitat there? I mean, that is what mitigates predation. A lot of people want to point to predators, and we know that predators will take their fair share, but it's really, do we have good nesting habitat? Do we have good brood rearing habitat in Pennsylvania? And that we know those are two things that we really would like to do better at, and we're trying to, as our habitat crews are on the ground every day trying to make it better habitat, and they do an excellent job.
But one of our problems in that scope is we only control habitat on 1.5 million acres, and that's where it's so important for us as stewards of this resource, even beyond our jobs, is to just try to get the right information out there. If folks own 5 acres or 100 acres, they can help all species out there.
Yep. Yeah, it doesn't take much to take a little ground out of production and make good wildlife habitat. And even if you have an apartment, to plant a single milkweed, stem of milkweed, can make a huge impact for things like monarch butterflies, which are in serious trouble. So everybody can do something. And if everybody does, in a state where really 86% is private lands, and we can try to help, but like you said, we only have so much direct control over our lands. Just trying to encourage people to do their best on their own land.
Even when I sat through a land management conference a couple weeks ago, and they were talking about just letting grass grow, not the nice manicured lawns, but like if you have an edge along a woods that you want mowed, just letting that grass grow a little bit changes the whole dynamic of everything.
Edges. Yep. That turkey argument with fishers, that reminds me, because I was just starting to get interested in the conservation field when we released river otters into Pennsylvania, and how concerned people were that they were going to eat every trout.
Yes.
And it just didn't come out that way. It just didn't work that way.
Right.
And so your predecessors were saying it's crayfish, that's where you're going to find the majority of their diet.
Sure.
Well, all you had to do is replace those 2 species with what you guys were just talking about. And that happened very on in my history when I was going, I think I might be interested in that. So same argument. Kind of interesting. It's just very cyclic.
Oh yes. Yeah. Yep.
So obviously your most current project, and I mean it's ongoing for quite a while now, and we're hearing a lot that we've already introduced the American marten. And we're hearing that daily on social media. I mean, as far as I know, and I'm going to get to you we haven't dropped any out of an airplane or a helicopter or anything yet, correct?
That's correct. Yeah. So you're right. We've been working on this project about 3 years. And what's interesting is we hadn't had a marten sighting for, I think, since the 1940s that somebody had reported a marten until we started talking about martens. And then all of a sudden we started getting marten sightings. And again, kind of similar to the mountain lion, we have people sending pictures, video in. And what most people are confusing them with are mink, because they are the same size as the mink. And then also fisher, or some of our true weasels like the long-tailed weasel, or squirrels, or wherever it might be. But yes, so we do get reported sightings, and again we follow up on those. But no, we haven't, and we're just working through that evaluation process to get it to the board for them to make a decision as to whether we would or wouldn't reintroduce the marten.
Just to hit on that too, a lot of people are saying there's a lot of things we're seeing is like, hey, they're killing our turkey population. So, just from the studies and obviously it's fresh on your mind, what is their diet of American marten?
Yeah, that's a good question, because with the marten in particular, what we've seen is, again, a lot of turkey hunters concerned, but a lot of grouse hunters concerned. And as a grouse hunter myself, this was one of my main concerns when I started kind of looking into this project. But that's where, again, going back to the diet, going back to the science, we looked at 13 different diet studies to really determine what are marten eating, and that's across their range. And what we found was really interesting. Again, another true omnivore, so they eat a wide variety of things, but they eat what's most prevalent and what's most appropriate for their size. So again, same size as a mink, about 2 pounds, about 19 to 24 inches long. And what we see, that the top 3 items that make up their diet are rodents, so voles, shrews, and mice. They eat an incredible amount of seeds, hard mast and soft mast, and then they actually eat an incredible amount of insects. Insects are actually one of their most important food items throughout the year when they're available. But again, they do eat things like fish and birds and reptiles, amphibians, all these other things. They just make up a much smaller portion. And talking specifically to things like turkeys, again, we didn't find any evidence that turkeys are a part of their diet, whether it's eggs or poults or adults. And then grouse, we do know are a part of their diet, but it's actually a very, very low prevalence. And these are in states where, as a grouse hunter, this is where I go to grouse hunt. Places like Michigan,
Wisconsin, right?
Minnesota, Wisconsin, up into Canada, high densities of grouse, and it's actually a very low prevalence. And when you look at where marten are, it's where grouse are. And it's actually where a lot of turkeys are too. And so that's important to consider. But looking at their diet's one of the best ways that we can determine if there's going to be a negative impact.
Right. So if we did a diet study on you, Chad, what would it show up? What would your diet be over the last couple of days?
About the same.
Just trying to be relatable.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that.
Yeah, it's funny.
So obviously, probably in your career, you've tagged some bears.
A few, not many.
Not many made it to York County?
Well, yes. I would generally have about 1 or 2 bears come through York County every other year. And as Tom had mentioned about the mountain lion, it was generally a young male seeking their own territory. All of York County would shut down when a bear would come through.
Kind of like a snowstorm in Atlanta.
It kind of was. And so we were always successful in tranquilizing those bears and getting them to a northern game lands. So our goal was not to conduct the research on the bears in York County. I didn't even have a bear trap in York County.
I bet they do now, though.
They probably do.
Yeah.
They probably do. I think the prevalent of bears is more in York. Again, still just passerbys, perhaps. But so I did a little bit, but not much.
Okay. So we get this a lot, too, about bears that have multiple ear tags. I mean, and folks think that this bear's been trapped and relocated multiple times. So, maybe if you could give us some of the reasons that from your shop, from Wildlife Management, why we trap bears.
Sure, yeah. Of course, Emily Corolla is our bear biologist, so she oversees bear management in Pennsylvania, and an important part of that is trapping and tagging bears. And there's only several species in Pennsylvania that we have a true population estimate on. A lot of our species, we just look at population trends or indices. But bears are one where we feel pretty comfortable or confident that we know approximately how many bears are in the state at any one time. And in order to do that, we actually use a method called mark recapture. So we mark a certain percentage of the bears that are out there. And then when we say recapture, they're actually recaptured in the harvest. And so we mark a certain percentage. We know how many bears are tagged. And then when we have harvest season, so we have a variety of different harvest seasons in Pennsylvania, and then we see a percentage of those bears come back in, then we can kind of extrapolate that out to see, well, what's our total population look like? And when we see bears tagged, and a bear is tagged, so it's given generally 2 ear tags. Each one is usually a different number. It's off by one number, so it'll be 001 and then 002. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's been captured 2 times. It just means that that's the sequence of numbers. And then generally it's given a tattoo up inside of the lip in case those ear tags come out. That's not always the case, but that's generally done. And then so as a part of the population estimate, we tag between around 700 to 800 bears a year in Pennsylvania. And there's certain quotas that are given to our state game wardens within different districts and counties that they have to capture and tag and then re-release. Now, occasionally bears are actually translocated. So if we get a nuisance bear, a bear that's causing problems in a district.
Like York County?
Like York County.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Like Chad mentioned. Yeah, those bears are then moved to appropriate habitat where they're not going to cause as much problem.
Hopefully.
Yeah, you hope.
Yeah.
That's correct. That's right. Yeah, so you try to move them into lower human density populations within the state to kind of allow them to then set up a different territory and kind of do their thing there. So that's why we tag bears in Pennsylvania, and that's why hunters will occasionally harvest one. Mm-hmm. And that harvest is very important in telling us how many bears we have within the state, which then helps us manage that population into the long term.
And one thing I wanted to talk about there too, because sometime in every hunter's life out there, if not multiple times, you get a survey via email or mail or phone call. That information is important. So many folks, the generation before I came to work here, and like we'd get a report card and people would burn it, and like that information's vital to wildlife. I mean, we're living in the best days of wildlife management, and the more that we can find out, whatever those surveys are. I got one on my phone. Actually, it's your survey that just came email, and you keep reminding me that I need to get it done. But that information is important.
It is.
It's so important. Take the time to send it back with your honest answers, and that's how we learn.
Yes.
Obviously, you can't be in every county every day, and that information is vital out there.
It is. It is. Like for our program specifically, like you mentioned, the fur taker program, we send out this fur taker survey. Fortunately, in Pennsylvania, we have almost more fur takers than any other state still. A lot of people, whether it's hunting or trapping. And I can't manage these 16 species, like you said, with one person. I rely solely on our fur takers to give us the information needed to then set seasons and bag limits, know if there's a problem in a population. Like muskrats are a good example. We've seen a declining muskrat population since the late 1970s. The only reason we've seen that is because of trappers. It's at harvest every year. It's trappers calling and telling us, hey, I don't see any rats on the stream anymore. And so without those folks, we can't get the information or the data we need to make good decisions and to know there's a problem if there is one. So, yeah, you're spot on.
That makes me sad, too, when you say that, because muskrats, when you look at muskrats as a kid, I mean, that's one of the reasons my passion runs so strong, and even my dad and generations before me, muskrats were a huge part of that. Absolutely. That spark that got you into the outdoors.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's people's... They're inputting. We're living right now, like you said, in the era of scientific wildlife management. We've come through 4 eras of wildlife management in this country, and like you said, this is the best one.
Yeah,
and we rely on that data.
Like the best class you came from, right?
It's true.
Yeah,
I appreciate you mentioning that.
So this one's coming to you, Chad.
Sure.
This one we get a lot too. My tax dollars pay for the Pennsylvania Game Commission.
Sure. Yeah, they do not.
Okay.
So
I love how you're so emphatic.
Next question. No, they don't. We are one of the independent agencies of the Commonwealth, and again, found in law. So when this agency started, it was started by and founded by petition of the Pennsylvania Sportsmen's Association, which later became the Federation of Sportsmen's Clubs. And at the turn of the 20th century, if you look on the landscape in the United States, most of the natural resource agencies were founded about that same time. And the main reason for that is because everything that we did during the era of exploitation, which basically ran up to 1900, from about the 1700s to 1900, where it was that mass deforestation, as Tom mentioned, which polluted streams, and again, the market hunting issues. Really no laws. Our first game law in Pennsylvania was in 1721, and it protected white-tailed deer 6 months out of the year. There was nobody to enforce that, so nobody listened to it. So point being is, that attitude shift really happened because people saw what was happening on the landscape, but also there was a publication called Forest and Stream Magazine that was, again, on the United States landscape, where folks like Theodore Roosevelt, George Bird Grinnell, all these folks are writing in saying, we have to change things here. It wasn't necessarily our agency that initiated that change. It was Forest and Stream Magazine.
Which Forest and Stream later became
Field and Stream.
Right.
And folks like George Washington Sears, who people may know as Nessmuck, who died in Wellsboro, just north of here. He wrote for it. Famous person. He paddled the Sarigam through the Adirondacks and said the same thing is happening here. That mass deforestation, and interesting guy. But that's happening, and the Pennsylvania Sportsmen's Association picked up on that, went to the General Assembly. The General Assembly said, well, this is a very large voting block, so we will appease this voting block, and said, you can have your Pennsylvania Game Commission, but we're not funding it. And so they gave us, that's a little bit of misnomer. They gave us between $100 and $500 a year for postage. We couldn't even pay our employees with that, what few we had, because it was mailing out to the different localities, the different new game laws that were on the books. So nonetheless, our first income, so to speak, was in 1901. That was a non-resident hunting license, which sold for $10.
Imagine how much $10 was.
Well, no kidding, because you could buy a resident hunting license today for $20. So this is 1901.
It's the last time we had a license increase.
And then in 1913, we have a resident hunting license bill passed for $1. And so all of that was put into what's referred to as the Game Fund. So we are one of the independent agencies of the Commonwealth. You'll know other ones like the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. That's an independent agency. Perfect example is the Turnpike Commission, where you're paying a toll. It's a user pay, user benefit system. And I would say that, we're talking about a lot of non-game species here, and that's something for folks to keep in mind and take great pride of, that people who are purchasing hunting licenses, people who are purchasing fur takers licenses, they're paying for wildlife management in this state, and always have.
Right.
And so, it's the hunters, it's the trappers, again, that really should be celebrated, because they're taking care of everything. They paid for bald eagle restoration, for a species they'll never be able to hunt or trap.
Right.
And when I say they, obviously I include myself in that. And so that is a point of pride with this agency. So no, we do not accept general taxpayer funds. We legally can't accept general taxpayer funds. And so hopefully, folks realize that a lot of people think like Middle Creek is a state park and paid for by their tax dollars and things like that. That's all paid for by hunters and trappers of the state.
Well, the other revenue stream too is Pittman Robertson dollars.
Of course.
And talk about that real quick, because Chad's not only our historian, he's one of the biggest stuff knowers that we have.
Well, PR started, Pittman Robertson really started during the Roosevelt administration. So Franklin. And so that PR funds basically is an excise tax that you're paying for, but you don't see it. You don't see it on your receipt when you purchase sporting arms or ammunition.
And archery equipment.
And archery equipment. That's right. It's an excise tax that's put on there. Then dependent upon how many hunting licenses are sold by each individual state, that money goes to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service divvies that money back to the states by basically how many hunting licenses are sold. So we have a fair amount of Pittman Robertson funds, and we can only use that they're earmarked funds. So they can't pay my salary as law enforcement. They can't buy my vehicle for law enforcement. They can't put gas or buy my farm. Nothing
with law enforcement,
right.
Correct.
So it has to go to habitat. It has to go to, for game lands improvements or purchase. It has to go to wildlife management studies. That's what Pittman Robertson is earmarked
and
for.
really, that's why we're sitting here today from our angle, from the marketing angle. In 2019, the Modernization Act allowed state agencies to help get their word out better about what conservation really is. And we're lucky in Pennsylvania to have north of 800,000 hunters, because that helps our you look at our forefathers too, that the land that we do own as an agency, the 1.5 plus million acres that we're able to, we're so fortunate in this state.
Gosh. That's larger than the size of the state of Delaware when you put it together. So I mean that's a lot of work. We have crews on the ground conducting all of that work and making sure that the habitat's appropriate for the species. As Tom said, it's all habitat based. The agency, just like every other agency in the United States, went from we'll just put animals back and everything will be fine to you've really got to concentrate on, the food, shelter, water, and then the spatial arrangement of those, which essentially is the definition of habitat, to make sure that wildlife populations are going to live. It's just not the hard releases. They work to a point, and then they don't work.
Well, look at it, human beings.
Sure.
I mean, we have habitat. We have everything that animals do.
Of course.
And when things go south or sour, there's a reason. It's same with wildlife.
Of course. Yeah. So that PR funding is very important to this agency. And again, PR can only go to the Wildlife Management Agency. We can't, the states can't use that for anything else. They can't say, well, geez, we're going to build a new roadway with PR funds. You can't do that.
Right.
So, that, again, hunters, fur takers should take great pride in that, because they're paying the bill.
Right.
And indirectly, they're paying the bill.
Right. For wildlife in the future, and when we're all gone, that we all leave it in a better place. That's what we're tasked with.
Absolutely.
This next one, and we're going to end it on this one. It gets my goat every time I hear it. And it's the Game Commission staff doesn't hunt and understand what's most important to hunters. And since I've walked through that door in 2019, the passion runs deep about hunting, about wildlife, and looking at it from the outside in of what hunters really are seeing out there or wanting. I mean, when we hear everybody, I mean, not every conversation you have is nice. I mean, but and you as well. I mean, especially like if you're in the field as an officer, the biggest thing we have to remember, we're all humans, and you get a lot more cured with sugar than salt. And I would encourage any messages. We're open. I mean, we take them all the time, but talk about your passion and like how you grew up and why you're at the agency you are. I mean, we kind of did at the beginning, and you left us for a while and came back because we're such awesome people.
Well, and that is partly true. So I grew up as a hunter and trapper, and as a young boy, that I honestly would not be here if I wasn't a hunter and trapper, because for me, I fell in love with wildlife through hunting and trapping, and you learn so much through those two, pastimes or passions. And thankfully, I've had some really good mentors speak truth into my life, into the past, and say, look, you really should pursue this as a career. And that has been, obviously changed the course of my life in total, but I still have that intense passion for hunting and fishing and trapping. And it kind of changes over time. So, I enjoy much more the time spent or where I'm at, or enjoy a lot more of the total kind of community feel of while you're out there and what are you seeing and how are things working. And I think that's true for most hunters as they kind of mature throughout their hunting career. But it's also led me to hunt throughout North America, and that's been phenomenal to take that passion and then expand it out and get to travel throughout the country and pursue a variety of different species. And every time I do that, I'm learning more and learning more. And as hunters and trappers, that's really what we're doing. We're expanding our knowledge on these species because we love them so much. And that's really where I believe most people the passion starts there, is they love that species so much.
Right.
And it's not hard to see when we look at groups like NWTF and RGS and DU and all these different groups where people just have an intense passion for a particular species or group of species. So for me, that's kind of, again, starting very young. And that's not the case with all of our biologists. We certainly have people that, may not have that same background, but what they do is they appreciate how hunting and trapping really, impacts the resource and how important it is to help us manage the species as well.
And every hunter goes through that stage. In your 20s, you got blood squirting out of your eyes. You want to shoot everything there is, and then by the time you're 50, you're sharing that experience and trying to figure out what makes a turkey gobble.
That's right.
One of my heroes, Ben Rogers-Lee, who was just instrumental in the turkey, 5-time world champion caller, and just like made turkey, put it on the map years ago, in my opinion. He said, later in his life, if he could breathe after he shot a turkey, if he could breathe life back into that turkey to hunt another day, he'd do it, because it wasn't about shooting that turkey. It was about that whole experience.
That's right. Yep.
And I know, Chad, you've got some famous photos flying around the shop, through hike the Appalachian Trail. I mean, your passion is outdoors for sure. I mean, we come to you for a lot of stuff, and especially when we get to the history part of it. I mean, you have your brain is unbelievable, what you know and what you remember, and can help us guide us through the right decisions to make sometimes.
Well, but we have a lot of folks like that in the agency, in fairness. And I didn't do as much big game hunting as a kid. I small game hunted. My dad quit deer hunting after I was born. And
he probably quit a lot of things after you.
Well, probably, but point being is, I had a mentor. His name was Leroy Meckley. He's long passed, but he took me dove hunting every day after school, and he took me squirrel hunting. And man, I couldn't believe it. And of course, scouting had a lot to do with that. We go to hunting camp through scouts, and with the Appalachian Trail, that was a big focus on my scout troop to make sure you did every section in Pennsylvania. And I didn't even know there was an Appalachian Trail. And
is it Appalachian or Appalachian?
Wherever you're from.
I got you. I get in that argument with Brian Burhands all the time. He's like, you're saying it wrong. I'm like, that's where I grew up.
Right, that's right. So point being, is just, as my life progressed, I through hiked the Appalachian Trail, hiked it from Georgia to Maine. And
what was your trail name?
Chad Leonard North.
Okay.
With the arrow going north.
All right.
Long story behind that, but because I have Leonard in my name, not at all. But so point being is did that and stayed in that community a little bit, and then came with the Game Commission after some other outdoor exploits, and being a game warden. It's unfortunately part of your job is, you have to take a lot of game and wildlife, but the injured stuff, things like that. So I kind of got away from it for a little bit, and then really started focusing on waterfowl hunting. And that's really kind of like my favorite kind of hunting at this point. So, we always tell our cadets that, hey, make sure you're going out and enjoying what you're protecting. It doesn't matter what that is. Just make sure that you're doing that. And because it's very easy, and it happened to me, it's very easy to go to just focus in on the job, right? Because the job is so great. And Tom, I'm sure, is the same way. You can turn this into a 24-hour-a-day position if you want it to be. You can. And most of us do. And so it's trying to kind of keep that balance too, to make sure you're enjoying it, and rather than just it's your job.
Right.
And so if the public is saying you guys don't understand because you're not doing it, if that's a reason, well, it is, but it's also because you're living it as well. And so I would say that the 900 employees that we have, 900 of them are always on the job.
Right.
They really are.
It's in your blood. It's passion.
It's absolutely true. So
no matter what facet you're in, and you threaten us with retirement pretty much on a daily basis. But like when you talk about your career here, what would you picture yourself doing if you weren't working at the Pennsylvania Game Commission?
I don't know that. I say this all the time. I don't know if I say it out loud. I'm the luckiest person I know. and I mean that. I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones.
That's awesome.
You know.
How about you? Have you ever thought about that?
I did approach law enforcement potentially as a conservation officer or just general law enforcement, but I'm very, very pleased that I kind of took this fork, because to me it is, like Chad said, it's a job that's always engaging, and it feeds into really your passion, and like we learned about in the last week or two, this idea of passion and purpose, and when you're living into your passion and purpose, how much good you can do for the world. And that's where I feel like our people are doing good things, not for the money, not for the prestige. They're doing it for the resource. And so that all Pennsylvanians who we serve can enjoy that resource, not just now, but in perpetuity. So in my mind, that's where I think all of us really thrive and doing what we love.
Yeah, we're going to drop the mic on that one. You can't really say
Can't
much
be
more than that. But I mean,
No.
one thing I will say, you're way too nice to be a game warden.
Well,
I mean, you're pretty nice too, Chad.
in all honesty, your Tom said he's not a supervisor anymore. He's one of the leaders in our agency,
Yeah.
you know, and you can tell that.
Yeah.
So we're lucky. We're lucky to have the people that we have
are.
too.
Definitely.
And you know, when you look across the landscape of folks, we're lucky as an agency, and you know, we're in my mind, we're the top Commonwealth agency, no doubt about it, because this draws a certain type of person.
Mm-hmm.
You like to win, don't you?
Yeah.
You didn't ever let your kids beat you in anything, did you?
No, but so what? So I will tell you, when my 16-year-old beats me in chess, she earns it.
I got you.
And I go, oh my gosh. So yeah,
You're that dad.
I'm that.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much. Anything else you want to add? Any myths you want to bust? And we'd like to do this again, probably on an annual basis, because there'll be more next year.
Oh,
but
yeah.
Sure.
you know, the biggest thing is let us know. Like,
Yes.
stop pointing fingers. Let's
Yeah.
talk about it.
Yeah.
That's
That's
right. Yeah.
all we can do, because we're all in this together.
Yeah, that's what's up.
From
You're
right
right
here
about that.
outside, we live this every day. But
Yep.
thank you all for joining us on Call the
Thank you,
Outdoors.
Matt.
And
Appreciate it.
Thank
Yes,
you.
sir.
Great
Thanks.
opportunity.
Thanks, Tom.